Your mother, we know, was a woman who was highly strung. There must have been many traumatic moments for you as a kid.
There were, but there were also so many good times. It's not all one colors, you know, nothing is. But I think that people know more about the kind of glum stuff because that's what writers write about. They think it's dramatic and so forth.
You're really a serious actress now, much more so than even before. I mean, a lot of people said you were greatly talented, not just beautiful. But now, since they shoot horses, don't they? They really are convinced. Do they act different toward you now? Does anyone treat you more seriously? Or? You forgot me, right?
Yes, I guess they do. People treat me more seriously because of that, because of things that I'm talking about, because of things that I'm doing. Yeah. It's a very good feeling, as a matter of fact.
Life magazine, 1970. If the eyes are too big, and they are twice too big, and if they surround a nose that could be subdivided, and if the body parts might have been assembled by a very parent on Christmas Eve, then how can the bearer of these oddments, how can Liza Minnelli, at 23, possibly threaten to become the major entertainment figure that she is becoming? Film critic Pauline Kael in a 1969 review of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Jane Fonda, who has been a charming, witty nudie cutie in recent years, has the true star's gift of drawing one into her emotionally, even when the character she plays is repellent. Jane Fonda stands a good chance of personifying American tensions and dominating our movies in the 1970s, as Bette Davis did in the 1930s. These two contemporary quotes about Liza Minnelli and Jane Fonda's personalities and talents clearly illustrate that by the end of the 60s, both had not only reached significant artistic milestones and proven themselves as versatile performers, but were also just beginning to emerge as major forces in the new decade's cultural landscape. Of course, neither had achieved this acclaimed status overnight. Instead, it was the result of years of dedication. Jane had already been acting for a good decade in Hollywood and Europe, while Liza had made a name for herself as a highly talented and popular stage performer. But their respective big screen breakthroughs in The Sterile Cuckoo and They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Marked turning points, not only the confirmation of talents already well known, but of something deeper, more profound and meaningful, validating Liza as a true triple threat with unlimited potential, and Jane as a dramatic powerhouse whose abilities went far beyond the kind of neglectable material she had mostly done so far. And all this acclaim and re-evaluation and artistic expansion also signaled one very specific step for both Liza and Jane. It was the moment they truly stepped out of their parents' shadows. So far, it had maybe been obvious to many that these second-generation performers possessed genuine talent that carried them far beyond the opportunities their names had initially opened, but this talent was still almost never judged on its own or seen as truly unique and distinguished, because their parents were not simply performers themselves, but rather living legends. One of the most famous directors in Hollywood's golden era, the probably most iconic entertainer in US history, beloved and adored since she was a little girl, and an actor who seemed to embody everything that was good, moral and decent. A symbol for justice and honesty, a towering figure in both Hollywood and the US as a whole.
The movies that he did that I knew he connected to on a primal level were Grapes of Wrath, Young Abe Lincoln, 12 Angry Men, roles where he stood up for the underdog, roles where he fought, sometimes risking his life for fairness and justice.
So for both Jane and Liza, achieving success as performers always meant more than simply demonstrating talent. Being good was not enough. Even being great was not enough. If they wanted to distinguish themselves and be seen as their own personalities, they needed to display a level of talent that was not only undeniable, but also able to overshadow even the commanding legacies of Judy Garland and Henry Fonda. A task that seemed basically impossible, especially at a time when both of these icons were still active and celebrated themselves. And so, the early years of Liza's and Jane's careers were met with a mixture of excitement and recognition, but also doubt and skepticism. Were they truly talented, or just copies of more famous originals? Could they give audiences anything that their parents hadn't given them before? Could the names Liza Minnelli and Jane Fonda actually stand on their own, independent of inherited fame? Their parents undoubtedly opened doors, but the burden of defining themselves, of finding their own identities and setting their own agendas put enormous pressures on their awakening careers, enough to crush even the most promising beginners. Considering the family backgrounds of Jane Fonda and Liza Minnelli, it feels hardly surprising that they both pursued a career in show business. Rather, it almost seems completely expected. They both grew up in this world, connected to important industry insiders, with very easy access to the needed support system. But at the same time, both of them also had a very close look behind the perfect facade of Hollywood, witnessing firsthand its sinister side and the destructive consequences it had on the people in it and those connected to them. Liza later remembering how her mother told her, "I'm your best example of what not to do," while Jane reflected, "When I was young, I didn't want to be an actress, because my father never seemed to bring joy when he came home from work." Their eventual success therefore did not come from any influence or encouragement by Judy Garland or Henry Fonda, but instead from Liza's and Jane's own determination to find the kind of creative success that not only reflected their different artistic ambitions, but actually stood in contrast to the often difficult examples set by their parents, striving to define themselves on their own terms, both professionally and personally.
See, I grew up with my mother constantly teaching me about her fears. She once said to me, "Watch me. And when I get upset, when I get depressed, when I get disillusioned, learn from it."
Jane Fonda was born in December 1937, while her father was working on the picture Jezebel opposite Bette Davis. She was named after Lady Jane Seymour, the third wife of King Henry VIII, a character that also appears opposite a different 1969 Best Actress nominee. Liza Minnelli, whose name was inspired by a George Gershwin song, arrived in March 1946 after her parents met as the director and the leading actress on the set of 1944's Meet Me in St. Louis. Both girls were given similar nicknames in their early childhoods, the Fondas referring to their daughter as Lady Jane, while Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli called their child Princess Liza, a nickname that was also used by almost everyone on the MGM studio lot, where Liza was soon a permanent visitor. I loved it. I knew every inch of it, all the shortcuts to different stages and all the underground passages. All the people there knew me.
When I was little, my parents both worked at MGM, right? And I would go there to visit them after school. And it was really boring watching like movies being done because it's tedious. They do close-ups and then they do over the shoulders. And so watching any of the acting was dull. But I found my way into the rehearsal halls. So I could watch Gene Kelly and I could watch, and it was this high, you know, I could watch Sid Charisse and I could watch these people moving. And that attracted me, the movement and the energy and the music. And it looked so joyful. And they looked like they were having such a good time.
While Liza Minnelli immediately had a natural curiosity for the profession of her parents and was invited to join them in the studio whenever she wanted, Jane Fonda, on the other hand, had little exposure to the world of show business as a child, mainly because her parents were very different people. Henry Fonda was among the most admired men in the country, a role model for decency and an image of the ideal American father. However, Jane later remembered that, for the world, Dad was Tom Joad, but it's hard to be a hero and a father. Henry Fonda could be charming, witty and warm in public, but he seldom showed any of these qualities with his family. Jane recalls him as moody, indifferent and extremely critical, uncomfortable with vulnerability, disgusted by open displays of emotions, and most of all, silent. As Jane later said, he would sit for hours in our presence and never speak. It was deafening silence. I can remember long car rides where not a word would be spoken. I would be so nervous that my palms would be sweaty from riding in absolute silence with my own father.
Did he ever tell you he loved you?
Not that I recall. No, I don't think so, and I think I would have remembered it. What was so interesting about him, though, was that this Midwestern, austere, remote, cold exterior, but he did macrame, he did needlepoint, he painted like a dream, and he expressed such depth in many of his roles, you know, so there was
a very sensitive man.
Oh, yeah. There were these outlets where you could see the soul of the man and the sensitivity. He just couldn't do it with the people who were the most, you know, close to him.
Why?
I don't know. I don't know.
Did you ever talk to him about it?
No, you didn't do that. No, no, no.
You couldn't talk to your dad?
No, no.
But Henry Fonda's family did not only fear his silence, but also his outbreaks of anger. In the confines of our home, Dad's darker side would emerge. We lived in constant awareness of the minefield we had to treat so as not to trigger his rage. Henry Fonda's third wife, Susan Blanchard, later said, Hank repressed, and when his anger broke out, it was terrifying. But this constant distance, anger, silence, and emotional absence pulled Jane even closer to her father, whom she idolized as a child, longing for connection and approval, later saying, I loved him desperately.
When you feel that you're not good enough and that you need to be perfect, you sort of, at least I did, I kind of became disembodied. I moved out of myself. And the empty space that was left when I moved out was filled with anxiety, and I kind of numbed it by a food addiction. It could have been other things. It could have been drugs or alcohol or anything, but mine was a food addiction, and I suffered from it for over 25 years, and nobody knew about it. It's a like alcoholism, it's a disease of denial. Only unlike alcoholism, it's easy to have nobody know about it. But it makes life difficult.
How could you do that? You would eat a lot.
Yeah, I would either starve myself, like as an anorexic, and not eat anything, or I would eat and throw up.
Eager to copy her father as much as possible, Jane became a tomboy, imitating his way of walking and talking and learning how to write. I didn't start wanting to be a girl until I was in my early teens. Jane's deep need for her father's love and affection consequently created a significant estrangement from her mother Frances, with whom she never had shared a close or affectionate relationship to begin with. Unlike Henry Fonda's first wife, actress Margaret Sullivan, Frances Ford was not a part of Hollywood, but a New York socialite with little interest in show business and struggling to adjust to a new life in California as a stay-at-home wife and mother.
This was 1939, 9 acres way at the end of Tucker Tail, and then the paved road stopped and it was a dirt road. So we lived on a dirt road and there were no other houses around. We had chickens. My mom would cut their heads off and kill them, and every night of my childhood I went to sleep to the sound of coyotes. They were my friends. There were bobcats and mountain lions. And
a very extroverted and energetic person, Frances also suffered from depression and mental illness, a condition worsened during her marriage to Henry Fonda, whose cold, distant and withdrawn nature was a complete opposite to her own open personality, increasing her feelings of loneliness and isolation. Jane had barely any connection to her mother during these years, sensing that Frances preferred her son Peter, who was born in 1940.
You know, my mother was, you know, you're little, you don't know exactly why, but you know that there's something wrong. Something must have happened when she was young, and I knew that she didn't really love me.
After Henry Fonda returned from his military service at the end of World War II, he immediately left his family again to start working on the play Mr. Roberts in New York. Jane knew that the marriage of her parents was breaking up and constantly put the blame for her father's absences on her mother. I don't remember Dad being around much. When he was there, I could almost feel his energy pulling him back toward New York. I could sense that he didn't really want to be there. In 1949, Fonda told his wife that he had fallen in love with another woman and wanted a divorce. Jane learned of this when her mother told her one morning before school, "If anyone mentions that your father and I are getting a divorce, tell them that you already know it." In the following months, Frances' depression deepened, eventually leading to her commitment in a sanatorium due to suicide risks. Jane quickly grew accustomed to her mother's many absences, without a clear explanation.
I knew somewhere that there was something deeply wrong, that there was a psychic fissure that made it impossible for her to really love. And so when I read 2 years ago, when I was writing the book, that she had been sexually abused as a little girl, plus beaten by her father, not abused sexually by her father, but beaten as well, I understood everything.
As a child, Liza Minnelli was equally used to long absences of her mother. She was 14 months old when Judy Garland had to leave her for the first time to seek treatment at a sanatorium, setting a pattern of separation that would recur throughout Liza's early years.
Oh, where's your mother, Judy Garland? Is she here? No. Where's Judy today?
However, unlike Jane Fonda, Liza always looked back on her early childhood with warmth and fondness, describing it as maybe painful sometimes, but overall happy and joyful. Also because Vincent Minnelli was a very adoring father who loved to spoil her just as much as Judy Garland did, and they both did their best to give Liza a carefree and perfectly happy upbringing, trying to keep the dark and unforgiving side of Hollywood away from her as much as possible.
I'm proud of my parents. They were not only great, great talents, but they were both wonderful people. It was terrific. And it's always hard for me. I know that it's hard for other people to understand that it was normal, because it always sounds so glamorous, but everybody's parents were equally as famous, so there was no basis for comparison. So we weren't isolated, and we didn't feel special, and we didn't, get all snobby and everything, because everybody was in the same boat.
And these were just neighbors to me. Yeah. So when there'd be a sing-along at home, and the neighbors come over, everybody knows that kind of thing. It would be Lana Turner. She sang good. She's wonderful. It would be Humphrey Bogart and Betty Bacall, Art Linkletter, Bing Crosby.
And these were people that your mom and dad would have in for Mr. Astaire, huh?
Yeah. The neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. And where was little Liza while all this partying was going on?
If I was lucky, under the piano.
Doing?
Listening. I loved to listen. I hated to go to bed when that was going on.
But the happy family life in the Minnelli-Garland household soon began to crumble. Although her parents tried to shield her from their disputes as much as possible, Liza gradually became more and more aware of loud fights or long silences, and in 1951, the couple officially divorced. However, the marriage did not end in disaster, and it was not a divorce born out of hate. Both Vincent Minnelli and Judy Garland had just come to the conclusion that their different personalities made living together pretty much impossible. Vincent quiet, reserved and controlled, Judy emotional, loud and extrovert. Both of them would therefore remain in one another's life. Minnelli later saying, "We stayed close, not just for Liza's sake, but because we also respected each other." He and Judy Garland therefore informally agreed to share custody of Liza, and she would spend long periods of time either with her father or her mother. Times that could not have been more different from each other. Stays with Minnelli were usually calm and structured, offering her a sense of stability and an early education in the world of filmmaking. Her stays with Judy, on the other hand, were usually emotional, chaotic and erratic. And while Liza had a positive relationship with Judy's next husband, Sid Luft, and their 2 children, she quickly became more aware of her mother's ongoing battles with depression, anxiety and addiction.
Did you have a normal life when you were being brought up, as a youngster?
I don't know. I have nothing to compare it to. You know what I mean? And I didn't know if it was normal. Now I look back and it wasn't normal, but to me it was normal.
Liza later recalled that her mother's mental health struggles forced her to grow up far too early. "I learned too much, too soon, too fast." Vincent Minnelli echoed this sentiment, saying, "Liza was only 7, but numerous responsibilities were already being placed on her. In many ways, she played mother to Judy's daughter." Often left alone with her 2 younger siblings, Liza knew how to order room service by the age of 6 and was hiring and firing staff by the time she was 11. She was also frequently awakened in the middle of the night by Judy, having to leave hotels or apartments on short notice when her mother could no longer afford the rent.
You spent a lot of time in hotels as a kid too, didn't you?
Yeah, I grew up mostly in hotels.
Now, was that fun? Did you think it was unusual that you were living in hotels as a child?
Yeah, I thought it was unusual, but I thought I could get away with murder, and I did.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you get away with what you can get away with.
Now, did you get to go to school while you were traveling in those days?
Yeah, I went to 22 schools.
22 schools?
Yeah. Some I just ran through. I didn't even see anyone.
And these were public schools, private schools, tutors?
You name it, I've been there.
You've been there. And
Yeah.
did you end up getting reasonable degrees?
Oh, no. I ended up getting zip.
You got nothing.
I got nothing except what I learned later.
And then, of course, Liza's childhood was also profoundly shaped by Judy Garland's various suicide attempts. But Liza insisted that she never took them seriously and believed that they were blown out of proportion. They were just silly things to attract attention. Sometimes I could help, but sometimes I couldn't. I just couldn't cope with the legend. The kind of childhood I had could make you or break you. Luckily, I made it.
I feel a little bit like she used to feel. You owe the public a certain amount of drama and a certain amount of, you know, whatever about her. What you really know about her is that there was that very dramatic side. In other words, it was dramatic on other people's standards, but we didn't live on other people's standards. Nobody in Hollywood did.
One time, I was on the school bus. I was going to school. And I passed a newspaper stand, and I looked out the window, and it said, Judy Garland runs naked through her house trying to kill herself. And all of the children on the school bus started to laugh at me, you know. And I knew that wasn't true because I'd been with her. And I went home and I was crying because the children had been so mean. And I said, Mama, it's not true. You have to tell them. You have to tell them it's not true so that they can write it differently in the paper so that they won't misunderstand. And she said, no, let them build a legend. I'll live by my own morals.
On her 42nd birthday in April 1950, Jane Fonda's mother Frances committed suicide during one of her stays at the sanatorium. Jane and her brother Peter were told that she had died from a heart attack, but Jane recalls that she felt emotionally numb at the news. I wondered why I couldn't cry. Mother's dead. I will never see her again. I said it over and over to myself, trying to bring up some tears. But I felt nothing. Jane also remembers that the family carried on as if nothing had happened. She and her brother either staying with her father, their grandmother, or at school. It took Jane many years to come to terms with her mother's life and to form a deeper understanding of a woman she barely knew. Mother was hidden behind depression, Dad behind his camera. Dad was so emotionally distant. With her coldness, Mother was not equipped to breach. Many women get burned up when all the outlets are blocked. They have no ways to express themselves, and there's no context in which they can do it. And it's very destructive. When she was in her 40s, Jane could finally cry for her mother, remembering that, when the tears came, they came from so deep within me that I feared I wouldn't survive them.
People that knew her just came into my life like miracles, and I got her medical records and learned a lot about her, including the fact that she'd been abused, which helped me understand everything. The puzzle got put together, and of course, once you understand why your parents are the way they are, you can then forgive them. And understand, I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was, but I was also able to forgive myself. That's the value of a life review. You realize it really had nothing to do with you.
For many years, Jane would also distance herself from her father, but she later worked to improve their relationship and get a better understanding of his personality, seeing him as a man who never meant to be cruel, but did not know any better. My parents were very nice, wonderful, wounded people. I understand that, and I worked very hard to understand him. And I've forgiven him. He did the best he could. She later credited her mother for giving her her own energy and drive, and her father for giving her her talent, her looks, and as she said, many recognizable characteristics of his. including, unfortunately, a tendency to withdraw and be abrupt.
Yeah, she did her best. They both did. They both did their best. One of the wonderful things about getting older is that you can learn to understand your parents and forgive them, and I've forgiven both of them. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable. They had issues, and the minute you know that, you can feel tremendous empathy for them. You know, I feel their presence. I do. And so they know. And I'm comforted by that.
Both Jane Fonda and Liza Minnelli experienced difficult childhoods marked by hard challenges, but the circumstances were still very different. While Jane suffered from emotional distance and coldness, Liza later always emphasized that she never lacked love or affection from her parents and that she does not look back with anger or regret. There is nothing I can say to convince people that I had a happy childhood. They don't want to believe that. Sure, my childhood was weird, but it was never dull.
She said, when you go to a party, go into the ladies' bathroom and look in the medicine cabinet and you'll know what kind of a party it's going to be.
Like Jane Fonda, Liza equally credited both her parents for shaping her talents and personality. She attributed her sense for show business and her knack for forming influential relationships to her father, while she always thanked her mother for giving her her voice, her vitality, her inner strength, her determination, and her sharp sense of humor.
My mother gave me my guts. My father gave me my dreams. And the combination seems to work.
Liza later said, "Sure, it was tough being her daughter, but Mama was a friend of mine. A trying friend, but a friend. She never denied me anything. Being Judy Garland's daughter is only a problem if you start listening to what people are saying. Believe me, no children could have a kinder, more thoughtful mother."
I was really supported emotionally from my family. I really was, despite what everybody says, you know. I had a horrifying family relationship with my mother. She was great to me, you know. Her disease was complicated and I didn't quite understand.
So both Jane Fonda and Liza Minnelli were born into the harsh spotlight of show business, witnessing firsthand the triumphs of their parents, but also the great personal costs, the pressure and instability by which they had been achieved, and they both experienced how their parents' careers dominated their lives, sometimes at the expense of emotional availability, stability, or personal well-being. It therefore can almost seem surprising that Jane and Liza still decided to pursue careers in the same world that had brought so much chaos into their childhoods. So the question is, why did they? And how did they find the strength to do it on their own terms and start to build reputations that slowly positioned them as accomplished artists of their own, independent from their background and heritage? Liza Minnelli's first professional acting role was in her mother's film The Good Old Summertime. But this wasn't an indication that she aspired to be an actress herself because, well, she was only 3 years old.
I had always been taught by my father and by my mother that I was a lady from the minute I was born. The only thing they forgot in the whole wardrobe, I mean, I had things, I had this, I had that, I had a hat, I had a parasol, I had that, was a little pair of panties.
A far more significant early moment in Liza Minnelli's life came when she was 10 years old and Judy Garland invited her to dance on the stage of the Palace Theatre in New York. Liza later recalled, "I remember hearing the waves of applause washing over us." For her performance, she got $5 from her stepfather, Sidney Luft, which she framed and gave a special place in her room. Liza had been enjoying to dance since she had watched the rehearsals on the MGM lot, but she now began to realize that what was happening on the stage, performing for an audience, was something that had an irresistible fascination for her. Something that she felt very close to, not just because of her mother, but simply because of her own feelings and interests. "I wanted to be a dancer. It seemed like an answer to the kind of loneliness I felt."
We moved to New York and I saw Bye Bye Birdie. And that changed everything.
Or the movie?
I thought, God, that looks like so much fun what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it was live, and I'd been used to my whole life watching movies being made, which is tedious. I mean, when they're making them, it's not so much fun to watch. But I'd never seen a live show, and I'd never seen kids up there. So that thrilled me.
I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do.
In America, you can't get a chorus job unless you can sing and act. So I had to learn how to sing because I didn't have my mother's gift of a natural voice.
Unlike Liza Minnelli, Jane Fonda didn't grow up involved in her father's professional world. Also, movie stars like James Stewart were frequent guests at Henry Fonda's home. Jane remained largely removed from Hollywood and Broadway, almost never visiting movie sets or attending stage rehearsals. There was a certain interest in her for acting, a curiosity to explore this unknown environment, but the overwhelming presence of her father, the grandness of his on-screen image, prevented her from actively pursuing any steps into this direction. While Liza felt pulled into the business, Jane watched mainly from the sidelines. Her acting debut finally happened at the age of 17 in 1955, when her father arranged for her to appear in a small role opposite him and Dorothy McGuire in a benefit performance of The Country Girl at the Omaha Community Playhouse. For Henry Fonda, this was mainly about quickly casting an unimportant role and giving his daughter something to occupy her time, but as he watched her on stage, he was struck by an undeniable realization. Jane had a raw, instinctive talent that he had been completely unaware of until now. He remembered that nobody knew who she was or that she was related to me, but you could hear the audience react. Something physical happened to the people in the theater. They sat up, they sucked in their breaths, they straightened up in their seats. She had presence. You either have it or you don't have it, and Jane had it. However, a few stage performances did not convince him that Jane had the necessary strengths to actually become an actress, and not wanting to encourage her to join a very difficult and challenging profession, he never told her of his impressions.
Did your father think you had talent?
I think my father never encouraged neither me nor my brother to become actors because he was afraid that we'd get the bug and not have talent, and I think he was very worried. Once we became successful, he was relieved, but he never encouraged it.
I went through different interviews, and there was an interview with your father that was done in 1974, and he said, and I quote, "Jane is the best actress I know." You surprised?
Mm-hmm. He never told me that.
Well,
no.
Jane herself did not change her attitude about acting after her first stage performances, feeling that it was not right for her, and also connected it too strongly with her father to actually see it as a career for herself, later saying, "I never wanted to follow in his steps." The feelings of Liza Minnelli were very different, happily taking first steps into the show business world of her parents and benefiting from their connections to see how far her own talents might bring her. At the age of 13, she already sang at parties for Lee Gershwin and then appeared together with Gene Kelly in his CBS special For Me and My Gal in April 1959. Gene remembered about working with Liza. "We were in front of this big audience and I was scared for Liza. I thought she was a sweet, gawky kid, but was going to blow it. I was so concerned that I almost blew it. But Liza, she was cool and calm." Liza also tried her hands at acting when she played the leading role in a high school production of The Diary of Anne Frank at the age of 14, and then accompanied the play to Italy, Greece and Israel. Some sources saying that her mother, Judy Garland, provided the money for this international tour. For Liza, all these early experiences confirmed her love for the stage, for singing and dancing and interacting with an audience. Unlike Jane, she was not hesitant to follow the path of her famous parent, but instead completely determined to become a performer of her own, maybe pursuing the same career as the legendary Judy Garland, but not setting out to just be a copy. "I didn't want to start my career in Hollywood because I had seen too intimately what Hollywood stardom can do to someone. I wanted to live in New York on my own and take lessons in singing and dancing and acting and see if I could do anything." Judy Garland, who knew about the dangers of show business better than almost anyone else, was not too keen to see her daughter make this choice, but also realized that she could not stop her. And so, in 1961, the 16-year-old Liza Minnelli took $100 she had saved, the $5 bill she had received from Sid Luft, and went alone to New York.
She said, "What are you going to sing at your auditions?" And I said, "I promise you I won't sing your songs."
Right.
And she looked at me with admiration, and she said, "You promise?" And I said, "Yes, Mom, I want to be my own girl, and I never want it to seem like I'm using you. Besides, who can sing those songs better than
Yeah.
you know, I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of a genius, you know."
For the most part of her youth, Jane Fonda missed this kind of dedication and ambition. Unsure what to do with herself and her life, she spent some time in Paris, toying with the idea of becoming a painter, but lacked the passion to pursue it seriously. Without any plans for the future, she visited her father in Malibu in 1958, where her life would suddenly change forever when she became friends with Susan Strasberg, the daughter of acting coach Lee Strasberg, who was living next door. When Jane told Susan of her lack of direction, she simply asked, "Why aren't you an actress?" It was maybe a simple question, but one that suddenly intrigued Jane. While Liza Minnelli found her ambition within her parents, Jane's difficult relationship with her father had so far prevented her from thinking about acting as a profession for herself. She needed encouragement from outside to believe in her own potential, and decided to meet Susan's father for a personal interview. I was paralyzed as he stared at me, his cold eyes made eerily larger by the thickness of his glasses. Then I felt something deep inside him relax and grow gentle. Perhaps he saw how scared I was. The meeting between Jane and Lee Strasberg became the most important event of her life so far, as the acting coach decided to accept Jane into his personal classes, later telling her, "The thing that made me take you was your eyes. There was such panic in your eyes." Attending Strasberg's classes at the Actors Studio in New York was an enlightening experience for Jane. Lee Strasberg was considered an acting force in the theater community. He had been the artistic director for the Actors Studio since 1948 and had taught the so-called method to performers like James Dean, Paul Newman, Julie Harris, Anne Bancroft, Geraldine Page, Joanne Woodward, Shelley Winters, or Marilyn Monroe, and it was his validation that finally gave Jane's life meaning and purpose.
Then after a few months, I finally did an exercise in Lee's class. And I'll never forget it. When it was over, he said to me, "I see a lot of people come through here, but you have real talent." And the minute those words came out of his mouth, it changed my life. It was like the top of my head came off. And suddenly, and I didn't even know this monster was lurking inside me, this like need to do this. It was hidden. I didn't want to admit it. But the minute he gave me permission, it was like, and it's the most wonderful thing in the world when you know what you want to do. You wake up knowing what you want to do. You go to bed knowing what you want to do.
For Jane Fonda, no influence shaped her acting career more profoundly than that of Lee Strasberg, not even her own father's. Strasberg helped her recognize her own talent and for the first time feel a sense of self-worth in pursuing a path she had long believed was not meant for her. And furthermore, his lessons were also so important to Jane because they taught her an approach to acting that fit perfectly to her personal attitude and understanding. The method asked performers to gain access to their deeper emotions and apply them to the feelings of their characters to make it a part of their personality. As Jane said about method actors, they didn't show, they were. It was a seriousness and dedication that appealed to Jane's curiosity, to her desire to dig deep into other mindsets to gain a better understanding of herself. In this way, the Actors Studio also allowed Jane to create a clear distinction between herself as an actress and her father. Henry Fonda, while not keen to see his daughter become an actress, had accepted Jane's desire to give it a try, but like many other performers from classic Hollywood, he despised method acting. For Henry Fonda, acting was simply something you did. You play a part, and when the director yells cut, you stop. Just like working as a butcher or a baker, without any research into inner motives and feelings. As he said about preparing for a role, I just learned the lines.
And we shot my close-up first. And there was so much light on me that I couldn't see his eyes. So I asked the cinematographer to dim the light a little bit so I could see his eyes. We did that part, and then we turned around, and it was his close-up. And before we shot, I said, "Is it okay, Dad? Can you see my eyes?" He said, "I don't need to see your eyes. I'm not that kind of actor."
Jane remembered that her father always resented hearing stories from her about her lessons and experiences at the actor's studio. I knew that my father felt nothing but disdain for acting classes in general and Strasberg's method in particular. He didn't believe acting could be taught, and to him, the method was self-indulgent rubbish that allowed untalented actors to feel they were interesting and deep. I used to come home from Lee's classes so full of what I was doing, and my father would say, "Shut up, I don't want to hear about it." I could see his curtain come down. I just didn't get through. There was obviously disappointment in Jane over her inability to connect with her father on their shared profession, but at the same time it made it easier for her to create her own persona as an actress and a student. Following an audition with Lee Strasberg and Elia Kazan, she had by now also joined the actor studio's regular acting classes, but would very often feel limited by her last name and the burden of her father's reputation. I was Henry Fonda's daughter. There was more attention paid to me and fewer opportunities to fumble and make mistakes. I'd have to be great or not at all.
But in the beginning, it was a matter of the resentment that I felt from other actors, which, well, the only reason she's got the part is because of, Henry Fonda's daughter's talent. And what I did to compensate for the guilt that I felt was I worked terribly hard, like everybody else would go to 2 hours of acting class a week, I'd go to 6, and singing and dancing, and I overdid it, the whole thing, I became twice as beatnik as everybody else, I took more subways than anybody else, it was a sort of a phony thing, but it was necessary for me to be able to feel, yeah, that's right, I'm Henry's daughter, but I've worked just as hard as all of you, if not harder.
Both Liza Minnelli and Jane Fonda had gone to New York early in their lives to find their own identities and capabilities, and both of them were determined to make it on their own. Whatever they achieved, they wanted to achieve it because of themselves and not because of their names or their parents' help. To support herself financially, Jane Fonda started modeling with a lot of success, appearing in magazines like Life, Harper's Bazaar, Look and Vogue. And Liza saved money by staying with friends and family members or living in backstreet hotels. Like Jane, she too began to attend classes, studying at the High School for the Performing Arts and with Jutta Hagen at the Herbert Berghof studio, and again like Jane, she also worked occasionally as a model, for example in 17 magazine.
So I went to acting school and dance schools and this, that, anything I could learn. I wanted to learn. I did summer stock. I moved scenery. I started at the bottom. And I never took another cent from my parents.
However, despite their determination to make it on their own, both Liza and Jane knew that their first steps into the business were made possible mostly by the names of their parents. Liza arrived 30 minutes late for her audition for the off-Broadway show Best Foot Forward, but the producers hired her almost immediately as a co-lead, confident that her name alone would make her a box office draw. Certainly audiences would come in droves to see the daughter of Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli. It wasn't my great talent that got me my first few jobs. It was simply my mother's name and the curiosity factor.
I didn't want to stand out. I was embarrassed. I wanted to be in the chorus, basically. I wanted to be in a dressing room with a lot of other dancers. I didn't want the star dressing room with isolation. It wasn't what I had in mind when I thought of the New York Theater. The New York Theater to me was working with other people, was doing something. Was like all the movies I would watch on TV about everybody having a good time after the show.
And to be fair, the producers of Best Foot Forward were certainly right about the appeal of Liza's name and that of her parents. The premiere of the show in April 1963 was one of the biggest events in off-Broadway history, as huge crowds blocked the streets outside, hoping to see Judy Garland visit the theater. Liza was obviously aware why people came to see her, but she was committed to distinguish herself as a singer and dancer, which was certainly not very easy for her. Liza and Judy not only looked alike, but also sounded alike. Comparisons to her mother were pretty much inevitable. So while many reviews of the show maybe praised Liza's singing, her charm and stage presence, others were very skeptical of what she could offer that hadn't been done by Judy Garland already. But both Judy and Vincent Minnelli publicly praised Liza's performance. Minnelli saying, "I was delighted with what I saw. The rough-edged talent would have to be honed, but the presence was there. What was needed, Liza had it."
Are you related to anyone in show business?
Kind of.
John, don't you think somebody ought to say something about the fact, in case there's one person listening who doesn't know it, that Liza is the daughter of Judy Garland?
Yeah. And,
right?
Everybody knows. Come on.
Liza had made a first impression, and there was a growing interest in where her talents might take her next, but for now, almost all attention on her was for being Judy Garland's daughter. Because of that, she also had to do many publicity appearances on behalf of Best Foot Forward in New York City, as well as on TV and radio, which in turn also increased her own name recognition. She later admitted that while she was keen to establish herself as an artist, she was also grateful for the early opportunities her mother gave her. "It's kind of an advantage being Judy Garland's daughter. I know why people came to see me."
What sort of an advice would you give to your very talented and very beautiful daughter Liza?
I don't give her any advice. She's very wise, and she's seen my mistakes and my fears and so forth. And she has her feet on the ground.
At the end of the 1950s, Jane Fonda made a screen test for director Joshua Logan, a close friend of her father, and got a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers, making her movie debut in 1960 as a cheerleader opposite Anthony Perkins in the comedy Tall Story. For Jane, it was not the kind of project she had hoped to do when she was studying in New York, finding it hard to apply the rules of method acting to the light material, and she also quickly realized that she was not supposed to think about the inner motives of her character, but simply to be pretty and charming. She therefore did not think very highly of the movie, but she still appreciated the experience to gain knowledge in movie acting.
What's so interesting about being in movies is that it's this combination of, you have to hit your marks, you rehearse, and there's no lights, it's dark and it's a whole different vibe, and you rehearse, and then you're supposed to repeat what you did more or less, hitting all the same marks, only now there's a lot of light and everything like that, and you have to become somebody and you have to exist in the moment while you hit your mark. So it's this very interesting intersection between technique and technology and emotions and becoming someone else. And every now and then, and frankly not that often in my career, it's all come together.
Despite Jane's own disinterest in her part, her acting debut was, equally to Liza's first off-Broadway appearance, a very big deal that caused a lot of attention. And like Liza, Jane also saw mixed reactions to her work. Many reviews complimenting her talents, but almost always comparing her to her father. Some critics feeling that she did not possess his natural instincts, while others thought that she could become just as great as him with a few more years of experience. However, some consider Jane's attempt at acting as more or less just a pastime, and that, quote, "as soon as she gets Hollywood out of her system, she'll settle down with a nice, handsome husband, make babies, and that will be that." But even if Tall Story was not truly an introduction as a gifted actress, there was still a great deal of publicity around Jane as a new star. A press release from Warner Brothers introduced her as a blonde, beautiful, and talented answer to Hollywood's search for new personalities, and many columnists described her as an ideal throwback to classic Hollywood beauties. She was covered in Life and Look magazines and talked to both Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, who described her as a normal, wholesome American girl and a mature young lady, beautiful, talented, and charming. It was the kind of old Hollywood publicity game that Jane very quickly grew tired of, along with the constant comparisons to her father.
Do you happen to have a father who was also reasonably well known in the theatrical world? Very well known.
Well, what?
Yeah, I'd say.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
And you're Jane Fonda.
Well, Miss Jane, it will come as no surprise to you that great numbers of us think very highly of your dad. And I must say we share his pride that you're coming in his footsteps in trace and making a great name for yourself as an actress.
To make it clear that she was serious about her craft and did not intend to simply coast on her father's name, Jane eagerly accepted the role of a rape victim in the Broadway play There Was a Little Girl, which opened in February 1960 and closed again after 16 performances. But even if the play was a flop, it was a decisive moment in Jane's career. I began to see the problems of Jane Fonda, the person, were the same as those of Jane Fonda, the actress. Acting, when you're serious about it, is tough. It hurts. It has to hurt. Otherwise, you're not acting. The serious actor tries to get to the truth of a character. To do that, you really have to reach into yourself. I was not used to reaching into myself, and when I did with this part, I was at first surprised to find that there was something there, then astonished to learn how thoroughly well hidden it had been. Jane openly admired her father's ability to step in and out of character from one second to the next without much thought, but she knew that she was a different performer. For him, acting was a distraction from his personal problems. For Jane, it was coming to terms with her insecurities, helping her to find both herself as a person and as an actress. All these realizations came to her during her time on There Was a Little Girl, for which she received overwhelming critical raves. The New York Times said, "Although Miss Fonda looks a great deal like her father, her acting style is her own. She gives an alert, many-sided performance that is professionally mature and suggests that she has found a career that suits her." Daily News added, "With the budding talent she displayed, she might become the Sarah Bernhardt of 1990. For her performance, Jane also received a Tony Award nomination for Best Featured Actress in a Play.
Jane Fonda, There Was a Little Girl.
So both Jane and Liza had left a first distinct mark early in their careers. The comparisons to their parents were still there, but they demonstrated an undeniable talent that proved they could succeed on their own.
If it was really about genes, then everybody whose parents were talented would be talented. And it doesn't work out like that. What works is the decision to work hard and the decision to go for it. Then, if you've got the talent and you're lucky enough to have the genes, then what you do with that talent is what makes it.
Neither Jane nor Liza were interested in a quick shot to fame or stardom, but instead knew that if they wanted to become serious artists, they needed time and the right environment to develop. For Jane, this meant appearing in a controversial role in a small Broadway play. For Liza, it meant continuing to do small off-Broadway productions, unwilling to appear in a big Broadway show, until she felt that she was ready and that people were ready to accept her as Liza Minnelli and not just Judy Garland's daughter. So she did various smaller theater productions instead. For example, Carnival, based on the movie Lily with Leslie Caron, or The Fantastics with Elliot Gould. She also became a regular presence on TV and released her first album in 1964.
I started by learning how to build sets and making paper roses for the chocolate soldier and doing all of the things you have to do to learn everything about the theater.
By now, reviewers began to notice that Liza had become an undeniable stage performer whose voice and style maybe resembled that of her mother, but who had the talent and personality to be completely her own. About her work in Carnival, Newsday wrote, "The comparisons to Judy Garland are inevitable. The tremulous voice, the respect for the lyric, the wide eyes, the clenching hands, the eyebrows never still. Yet by the time Liza sings, the applause belongs to her. From that point on, forget to make comparisons."
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Liza Minnelli.
Despite Liza's efforts to step out of her mother's shadow, one of the most significant moments in her early career was performing alongside her in London in November 1964. Liza was initially not interested in participating at her show, but had no choice after Judy Garland, in need of a hit after a poorly received performance in Melbourne, had announced her daughter's appearance to the press. For Judy, it was most likely a desperate attempt to have her daughter by her side for emotional support, but she was apparently caught off guard by the reaction of the audience, which completely fell in love with Liza, who was able to keep up with her mother for the entire show and received rave reviews for her singing, which was now seen as completely equal to Judy Garland. As Liza herself said, "In 2 hours, we went through our daughter's discovery, that she has a force within herself and a mother's reaction to her daughter growing up.
And I come on and I sing, and the audience really likes it. And I hear her backstage going, "Yeah, baby, go, yeah, baby." Then I sing the second song, and there's more applause. She says, "Yeah." I thought, keep going, Minnelli, keep going. By the fifth song, I turned to her, and she was putting on her lipstick in the wings, and I thought, uh-oh. And my mother did not come back on stage. Judy Garland came back on stage. It was like competition, but with enormous love, but with this sense of, I'm dealing with a power out here from both of us. You know, it was terribly funny at the end, because we walked off the stage together, and she said, "Great, baby, that was just great." And she patted my behind. She said, "I'll see you in the dressing room." And I started to walk, and I turned around in time to see her running back out on stage for another bow. And I went, "No, you don't." And I went right with her.
A mother and a daughter go through 3 or 4 years of, I'm going to do what I want to do. Well, for God's sake, you know, it's that thing of a woman, when the mother suddenly realizes that the girl is a woman, and she views her as another woman. It's a lot to take for a mother. I went through 4 years and 2 hours.
When Liza joined her mother in London, she had already started auditioning for her first big Broadway role, as the title character in Flora the Red Menace, a satirical musical about a young American who falls in love with a communist and joins the party. So far, it had seemed that Liza's various auditions had been for nothing, as the show's director George Abbott was against casting her, but after the raves for her appearance opposite Judy Garland in London, the role was finally hers.
One substantial break is all I need to make them all stand up and cheer.
The show also introduced Liza to John Kander and Fred Ebb, with whom she formed an immediate bond, and who worked very closely with her to help her develop her abilities as a performer. Flora the Red Menace opened on Broadway in May 1965 to mostly mixed and negative reviews, critics enjoying neither the plot nor the songs and dismissing the show pretty much overall. However, Liza again did receive a lot of praise for her performance, even if it was not overwhelming. Newsweek was especially critical of her, saying that Liza was engaging but far from accomplished, and it is unpleasant to see her rushed into a big Broadway show at 19. Her voice is thin, her movement stiff, her presence wobbly and uncertain. Other reviews compared Liza negatively to Barbra Streisand, another newcomer who had just taken Broadway by storm with Funny Girl. Yet the majority of Liza's reviews remained highly positive, with one praising her as a star to be, a performer of arresting presence who does not merely occupy the stage, but fills it. But no matter if good or bad reviews, references to Judy Garland were still omnipresent in nearly every article, comparing their voices, singing styles, acting, dancing, and stage presence.
New York, or Broadway, has done it again. 4 or 5 days ago, Liza was a young and talented actress and singer who was looking for a place in the sun, and then Flora the Red Menace opened up, and now you are a star.
Ultimately, Flora was regarded by many involved as a disappointment, closing after just 87 performances and failing to recoup its investment. However, Liza made history by becoming the youngest ever winner of the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical, although it was widely agreed that she benefited from a rather weak competition. So Liza's Broadway debut was ultimately a mixed experience, a personal triumph, but not the breakout success that would cement her as a Broadway star or fully distinguish her from her mother's legacy. It was therefore important to keep moving and continue to develop herself. It was a goal that was equally important to Jane Fonda, who remained uncertain if Hollywood was the right place for her acting ambitions. Following the release of Tall Story in 1960, she began to quickly change as a person, unwilling to play traditional publicity games, rejecting the public persona expected from her, and beginning to distance herself openly and defiantly from her father. She still conducted interviews, but now on her own terms and outside of the guidelines of her studio. She sparked controversy by speaking candidly about attending therapy, and especially when she told columnist Hedda Hopper that she considered marriage obsolete, stating, "The thing I object to is that everyone seems to expect a woman to get married. Why should this burden be placed on women? Why should a woman have to marry?" But the biggest attention in the press was focused on her regular public attacks on her father and her brother Peter. Speaking about her father, Jane often reflected on his emotional distance during her childhood and her personal need to prove herself to him as a performer. "I'm still fighting being Henry Fonda's daughter. I think I have to fight a little more. I know it's very strange that a girl should feel competitive against her father, but that's how I feel. I always feel that I have to prove to him that I'm right. Somehow, he can't seem to separate my being his daughter from my being an actress." As for her brother Peter, Jane dismissed his recent efforts to become an actor as well, and admitted that they were largely estranged due to his conservative political views. Both Peter and Henry Fonda would occasionally shoot back at her, giving the press an almost never-ending back and forth between the three family members. Henry Fonda saying, "I knew those two children were going to be rebellious if their old man was successful at something, and they decided to do the same thing. I had to hold my breath sometimes and not let it hurt too much. Before long, there's a reporter to interview me, and he has a clipping that says Jane Fonda thinks her parents led a phony life, or that she thinks her father should have been psychoanalyzed 35 years ago. Now it's alright for her to think it, but I don't think it's alright for her to say so in an interview. After all, I am her father. I mean, that's disrespectful."
Have you got a father named Henry Fonda?
Yes.
Jane's defiance of her father was not only a personal development, but also crucial to her growth as an actress. She knew that the audience's expectations of her persona and her talent were mainly shaped by the persona of her father and limited the kinds of roles available to her.
And I hated playing the nice girl next door.
Jane knew that if she wanted to play more challenging roles, she had to be her own person, someone not associated with the reputation of Henry Fonda, and she returned to Hollywood in 1962 to play a sex worker in A Walk on the Wild Side, a role that finally allowed Jane to use her method acting approach on a big screen. But while she had been very eager to play the role, the movie and her performance were met with mixed reactions, some critics calling her shrill and one-dimensional. She consequently returned to the stage, but her next play, The Fun Couple, was a downright disaster, closing after 3 performances. Jane then took on one final stage role in an actor studio production of Strange Interlude, co-starring her acting hero Geraldine Page, but afterward she turned her back on the theatre for more than 40 years as she grew to resent the stage's demand to repeatedly perform the same role over and over again, preferring instead the creative freedom offered by film. However, this also meant a return to the kinds of roles she didn't want to do. A Walk on the Wild Side had not changed the perception of her on-screen persona, and she was instead quickly typecast in romantic comedies. I was Henry Fonda's daughter, which of course meant that I was polite, I was nice, I was the girl next door. All of the things that I didn't feel I was.
There was a role in a film called Splendor in the Grass opposite Warren Beatty that I really wanted, and I auditioned in front of the great director Elia Kazan. And when the audition was over, he was standing below the stage and he asked me down to the footlights and he looked up at me and he said, "Are you ambitious?" I said, "No, because you aren't supposed to be." This was like in the 50s. "You were not supposed to be ambitious." No, and I knew right then when the word came out of my mouth that I wasn't going to get the part. I was a good girl. I was so boring. Oh my God, trying to be good.
It was a difficult time for Jane as an actress, stuck in roles that only seemed to fit the public idea of Jane Fonda, but not her true ambitions and talents for dark, uncompromising complexity. She was often compared to actresses like Sandra Dee and Marilyn Monroe, and in danger of not truly being taken seriously, considered a soap opera heroine, suitable only for lighter material and stuck in the studio system of the past, also mostly working with people of her father's generation, men who stood for the old Hollywood. The screenplay for The Tall Story, for example, had been written by Julius Epstein, famous for being a co-writer of Casablanca.
It was a Hollywood where the major studios ruled. The big movie moguls like David Cohen and Jack Warner and, you know, the people who ran the big studios from the beginning were still in place. And I was under contract to Warner Brothers and then to Columbia. I was a contract player.
However, Jane Fonda was also immediately noted for the contradictions surrounding her. A woman stuck with the image of a nice girl next door, yet starting to distinguish herself as a unique and new kind of performer who, even with limited roles, had the visible potential to become one of the screen's great actresses. There was no clear understanding yet of who Jane Fonda truly was, but she had an intensity in her screen presence that began to capture more and more attention. Stanley Kaufman wrote in the New Republic in October 1962, "I have now seen Miss Fonda in 3 films. In all 3 of them, she gives performances that are not only fundamentally different from one another, but are conceived without acting cliché and executed with skill." Director Jose Quintero, who had worked with Jane on Strange Interlude, said about her, "With Jane, we see life as it happens to her. We see it through her perspective. I think she's unafraid to see it all." And George Cukor, who directed Jane and the Chapman Report, publicly stated, "She has such an abundance of talent that she must learn to hold it in. She is an American original." Yet all this praise did not help Jane Fonda's career in Hollywood. The industry was maybe slowly changing, influenced by new trends and developments coming across the Atlantic, like British kitchen sink dramas or the French New Wave, but she was not part of these trends. If she wanted things to change, she had to do something herself. If these trends did not come to her, then she had to go to them, and eagerly accepted an offer by MGM to shoot her next film in France. Following her Tony win for Flora the Red Menace, Liza Minnelli was very keen to work with Kendall and Ebb again on their next show, a little musical called Cabaret. But despite various auditions, she was allegedly never seriously considered by director Hal Prince, who wanted to cast an English actress in the role of Sally Bowles and also somebody not known as a strong singer, finally deciding on actress Jill Harvers, who received overall mixed reviews for her work. It was certainly a disappointment for Liza, but she did not slow down and continued to work hard on developing herself as a performer, especially with the help of Fred Ebb, who became the most important influence and mentor in her career, transforming her from Judy Garland's daughter into Liza Minnelli, finding her own voice, sound and style.
Was she, like everybody who starts, I think, was imitating everybody. And not, she didn't have a style of her own. So out of that came my opinion that she should just be who she is, which is terrific.
Fred Ebb further explained Liza's unique appeal with the words, "She flatters an audience. She really cares for them. She makes people want to look after her. She's everybody's kid sister. Every guy's dependent girl. Liza's never idle. She never stops. She just has a rage to live. She went through crazy, sordid things with her mother that I still find hard to believe. One push either way would have made her crazy, but somehow between her father's calming influence, her mother's love of life and marvelous sense of humor, and Liza's own talent, she came out of it. It still amazes me sometimes." Under the guidance of Fred Ebb, Liza Minnelli slowly became one of the greatest American entertainers of her time. Together, they developed a nightclub act that became an enormous success first in Washington and then in the Empire Room at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. The audience included guests like Ethel Merman, Ed Sullivan and Diane Warwick, and Variety wrote, "She is one of only 2 or 3 performers who have received a standing ovation on opening night in the last 15 years. Liza also appeared to loud acclaim in London, at the Coconut Grove in LA, in Monaco for Prince Rainier and Princess Grace, and in Paris, where she was praised as the American Edith Piaf.
Was there a time when being a mother's daughter was a handicap?
No, it was never a handicap. It got to be a bore, you know, because we live in a world of comparisons. I find myself doing it, and it drives me crazy, because I remember that I used to not like it. But they'll say, I'll say, "I saw the most wonderful singer last night at a piano bar." And they'll say, "Well, what's he like?" And I'll say, "He's like and you name somebody else, and I no, wrong, don't do that. Stop it.
By this point, Liza's stature and public image had undergone a clear transformation. She had become a star in her own right. Many columnists now asking Judy Garland about her daughter rather than the other way around. In a telling reversal of roles, Liza had also asked her mother to join her on the stage during one of her nightclub acts. It was an unmistakable sign that, as an entertainer, Liza had emerged as Judy Garland's peer.
Who are some of your favorite singers? Do you have people that you like to listen to and that you think are
Oh, yes.
sensational?
I think Barbara Streisand. I think Liza Minnelli.
Having reached the first top, Liza Minnelli began to set her sights on a new artistic challenge: acting. While the idea had been on Liza's mind for a while already, the opportunity had never presented itself. More about this soon. But it was the influence of her mother that again helped her to make a first important step. When producer Michael Medwin began working on Charlie Bubbles, a British movie directed by and starring Albert Finney, he received a call from his good friend Judy Garland, who asked him to let her daughter audition for the small role of a secretary. Medwin promised and found Judy's daughter, who was quite surprised about the offer, but later remembered, "I didn't ask why he called. I figured if Albert Finney wants to see you, you go." And following her audition, Liza was officially cast in her first movie role, describing the project as, "The whole script is kind of weird, but it's good weird, not crummy weird." She also enjoyed working with Albert Finney, who gave her one of the most important advice in her acting career when he told her, "You have a face that registers everything. It's not veiled enough. Do half of what you're doing."
Somebody said she's very talented, but she reminds me of a canary on speed.
The movie debut of Liza Minnelli was certainly met with less interest and enthusiasm than that of Jane Fonda. Liza was, after all, already well known, so it wasn't a discovery of a new personality, and neither her role nor the movie she was in made a big impact with American critics. The New York Times stating that she played her role with a voice pitched to set the teeth on the edge, and Variety calling her characterization cloying. British reviewers, on the other hand, had much more praise for the movie as well as for Liza, describing her performance as beautiful and superb. However, she was still so unknown as a movie actress in the UK that the trailer mispronounced her name.
Liza Minnelli, marvelous, fascinating star of stage and TV.
Can we sort it out once and for all how you like your name pronounced?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Liza.
Liza.
With a Z.
After this relatively quiet film debut, many assumed Liza would return to the stage, having yet to make a lasting impression in cinema. Rumors circulated about a possible musical adaptation of Roman Holiday, and there were reports she had been offered the lead in Promises, Promises, a new Broadway show based on Billy Wilder's The Apartment. It seemed her path was firmly set in musical theatre, until a much-desired film offer changed the course of her career. In 1964, Jane Fonda arrived in France to work on Joy House alongside Alain Delon under the direction of René Clément, one of the most relevant French filmmakers of the post-war era, known for his pictures The Damned and Forbidden Games. Like most of her previous movies, Joy House failed to win over critics, particularly in the US, but the experience had a lasting impact on Jane. Working in France offered her a sense of artistic freedom and creative expression that Hollywood had rarely allowed, fulfilling both her personal and professional aspirations. She was also immensely adored by the French press, not only because she was the daughter of Henry Fonda, a man widely seen as the embodiment of American virtues, but also for her own striking presence, charm, and evolving identity as an actress distinct from her father's legacy. If Liza Minnelli was the American Piaf, Jane was the American Bardot, her style and beauty covered in countless outlets. And while working on Joy House, she also began a relationship with the man who had made the real Brigitte Bardot an international sensation in 1956 with the movie And God Created Woman, director Roger Vadim. And despite her own earlier objections to the institution of marriage, she and Vadim got married in August 1965, a union of many ups and downs. I could write one version of my marriage to Vadim in which he would come across as a cruel, misogynistic, irresponsible wastrel. I could also write him as the most charming, lyrical, poetic, tender of man. Both versions would be true.
One night, Vadim brought another woman into my bed with me, and I went along with it. It reinforced my feeling that I wasn't good enough. And one of the reasons that I went along with it was because I felt that if I said no, that he would leave. And I couldn't imagine myself without him.
Due to her marriage, as well as her belief that French movies were superior to those made in the US, Jane moved to a farm outside of Paris and bought out her 7-year contract with Joshua Logan and Warner Brothers to gain more freedom and control over her career. At the time, this was seen as a very unconventional step. Making movies in Europe was not the norm for American actors, rather something they did for tax breaks or because they had been blacklisted. For an actress on the brink of traditional stardom, it was seen as a very unusual and possible career-destroying choice. Yet Jane made it clear that conventional Hollywood fame held little appeal for her, preferring to choose her own path, and from now on, her profession existed in two entirely different worlds. French movies for her own artistic satisfaction, American movies to make money. I had come to France for work, yet I had been drawn there for more personal reasons. Maybe here I could begin to hear the sounds of my own voice, try to find out who I was, or at the very least find a more interesting persona than the one I inevitably slipped into back home. It was a phase of her career that again underlined her contradicting stardom and that left many observers both in the US and Europe very often highly perplexed, as Jane established herself as a comedian and box office draw in the US with movies like Cat Ballou or Barefoot in the Park, and as a sex symbol in France, where she appeared in her husband's movies Circle of Love and The Game is Over, liberating herself from her personal and professional background at home. As the New York Times stated during this period, Jane Fonda has managed to maintain two entirely different public images simultaneously between France and the United States. Circle of Love gained a lot of notoriety in the US for this billboard on Times Square, but artistically her French movies did not cause a lot of excitement. Judas Christ said about The Game is Over, Roger Vadim firmly establishes Jane Fonda as Miss Green Nude of 1967, while equally firmly setting the intellectual course of cinema back some 40 years. For Jane, however, the success of her movies in France was rooted firmly in her growing sense of confidence as an actress, irregardless of critical success, but her time in France furthermore allowed her to finally identify herself based on her own terms and not solely in connection to her father, gradually re-evaluating her relationship with both him and her brother. My rebellion against my father really ended when I went to Europe. It was then that I became my own person. There was certainly a time when I tried to rebel against being my father's daughter, but now I don't feel the need to strike out with wild remarks. I feel more relaxed and tranquil than I did 2 years ago. Her most notorious movie during these years in France is undoubtedly Barbarella, a film version of a softcore science fiction comic strip that her husband described as a sexual Alice in Wonderland of the future. Jane had accepted the role, which had already been turned down by Sophia Loren and Brigitte Bardot, after her husband joined the project as a director, saying, "I don't think of it as an erotic film. It's just funny and free and nice. If I have anything as an actress, I have variety."
And you said that you were once ashamed of the film, but now you embrace it. Is that so?
Yeah, well, you know, with healing and wholeness comes humor. I have more ability to laugh at myself and to laugh at life, and I look now at Barbarella and I see the charm of it. You know,
you were pretty cute.
I was pretty cute, and the whole Vadim's vision, this sort of science fiction, sexy, playful, Rube Goldberg-ish, spit in a prayer because we didn't have any major special effects. Altogether, it added up to a lot of charm, and there's a reason that it's a cult classic.
I don't want to go into the movie in more detail here, because there's so much you could say about it. The important thing is mainly that, even if Jane appreciates Barbarella today, at the time she began to feel underwhelmed with her work for various reasons, later saying, "How I survived so many bad films, I'll never know." She suddenly realized that by 1969, both her father and her brother were overtaking her professionally. While the 1960s were a mostly disappointing period for Henry Fonda, he successfully played against type in 1968's Once Upon a Time in the West, a movie very present in Jane's life as it was the year's biggest box office hit in France and gave her new respect for her father's talents and willingness to step outside his comfort zone. And by the end of the decade, her brother Peter had also undergone a complete transformation, turning from a staunch conservative into a long-haired rebel after various trips of self-discovery with LSD. And as part of this transformation, Peter produced, wrote and starred in Easy Rider, a movie that famously forever changed the American movie landscape and turned him into a major celebrity. Looking at the work of her father and her brother, Jane felt that she too had to give more meaning to her career and find a project that would not only suit her artistic ambitions, but also fulfill the demands of her own personal transformation that had started around this time and would soon turn her into a completely different person. I needed to make sense of life and feel I had a purpose. Filming Barbarella at a time when so much change was taking place in the world had acted as years to my malaise. Who was I? What did I want from life? And as she began to ask herself these questions more seriously, she received an offer that had the potential to redefine her career and maybe reshape her entire sense of identity. Around the same time, Liza Minnelli was also getting involved with a project that would mark a major turning point in her career. Alan Pakula was a successful studio executive and producer, well known for his collaborations with Robert Mulligan, such as Love with the Proper Stranger, Inside Daisy Clover, and of course To Kill a Mockingbird, but his dream had always been to direct. I would go into a deep depression when those pictures started shooting. The only reason I had come out to Hollywood in the first place was to work with actors. In 1965, Pakula picked up a novel by 25-year-old author John Nichols called The Sterile Cuckoo, about a love affair between a young, mismatched couple. Impressed by the layers of the story, he optioned the book as the ideal project for a young, upcoming director, until he suddenly realized, wait a minute, I want it for myself. I thought that it's ridiculous to use a young director. Why don't I use a man who is not quite so young, but who is certainly inexperienced, meaning myself? I'm getting less and less young by the hour and by the day, and if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And suddenly, life came into focus again. Like Alan Pakula, Liza had also read the novel in 1965 and was immediately fascinated by the central female character Pookie, a woman who craves love and attention but cannot stop her self-destructive behavior, giving confidence and self-assuredness to her initially shy boyfriend Jerry, but in doing so, he inevitably outgrows her and leaves her behind. As the book states, it got so that we were always off balance together. One second I would love Pookie so much my intestines twinked, the next second I would dislike her intensely and sincerely wish that she would take herself and her wisecracks and go far away. For Liza, Pookie was a character she immediately felt very close to. It was a strange feeling, but I felt a deep understanding and sympathy for Pookie. Pookie got me, her incredible imagination. She knew so little about the real world that in an odd way she could see it very clearly. Liza got in touch with Alan Pakula, telling him that she was the one who should play Pookie once he started to make the film version of the novel. And Pakula was immediately enchanted by what he described as Liza's wild and passionate enthusiasm for the character, and agreed that she was the ideal choice for the role. However, by the mid-60s, Liza had never been in a movie, and producers were not interested in giving the female lead to a more or less unknown. Being Judy Garland's daughter might have helped Liza with her early stage roles in musical productions, but her appeal on movie audiences in a straight dramatic role was judged very differently. Furthermore, Pakula also felt that producers were turned off by the screen test he had done of Liza together with actor Wendell Burton, remembering it as the most overly directed piece of film, I think, in the history of celluloid. I had them do everything you could possibly do in a lifetime in 5 minutes of film. They cried and they laughed, and they were happy and they were unhappy, and they were ecstatic and they were suicidal. It's very dramatic to the naked eye, but the camera looks at it and says too much, too much, too much, too much when you see it on film. Firmly set against Liza, the producers advised Pakula to get Patty Duke, Elizabeth Hartman or Tuesday Weld instead, unwilling to risk their money on a first-time director and a first-time female star. But Pakula couldn't envision the Sterile Cuckoo without Liza, and instead of casting another actress, postponed the project, doing Up the Down Staircase instead, while Liza continued her cabaret and nightclub acts, unwilling to make any long-term commitments to be available for the role once the financing would be secured, which finally happened in 1968 when Paramount agreed to greenlit the budget under Pakula's conditions. As Liza later said, "It took me 3 years to get that part." There was some doubt in the press that Liza could make a successful transition from the stage to the screen, but she said in interviews that her mother supported her choice, telling her, "Go baby. That's the kind of story I wish I could have done."
What do you prefer, singing or acting in front of an audience or playing a role in a movie?
I think it's all the same. I think it all comes from acting. If you're singing, at least this is what I feel, you're acting with music. If you're dancing, you're acting with your body to music. But I think it has to come from acting.
So Liza had to fight for years to secure the role that became her breakthrough as a movie actress. Jane Fonda, on the other hand, was simply offered the part that forever changed the perception about her on-screen personality.
So there's amazing political upheaval.
Oh my lord, all over the world.
And obviously things changed for you. You had a kind of political awakening, and you start making these very dark films. This is a film that's set in the Great Depression. It's about these dance marathons where people would dance themselves, for weeks in the hope of a prize.
They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was based on a 1935 novel by Horace McCoy, describing the brutality of dance marathons that often took place during the Great Depression, asking couples to dance for weeks until only one remained. Seen as the perfect metaphor for the brutality of capitalism, the book gained a cult following among French leftists, such as Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. There had also been various attempts to turn the novel into a movie already, including one by Charlie Chaplin, which was to star his son Sidney and Marilyn Monroe, but none of them ever came to fruition, as the material was considered too dark and discouraging. However, as American society became more disillusioned during the 1960s, filmmakers felt that the time had finally come for the story to be repeated on the big screen. Screenwriter James Poe, who had won an Oscar for Around the World in 80 Days, was heavily involved in the project, delivering a first draft of the screenplay, confirmed as a director, and also suggesting Jane Fonda for the central role of Gloria, a cynical contestant of the dance marathon. His suggestion was certainly met with a lot of confusion, because by this point, Jane Fonda was not considered the kind of heavyweight actress who could tackle such dark material, mostly known for sex comedies, and currently starring in cinemas as Barbarella. But Poe, like Lee Strasberg 10 years earlier, saw something in Jane Fonda's eyes, saying that they had the quality of a haunted animal, and he felt that she would be the ideal choice for the role. For Jane, it was an offer that came exactly at the right moment in her life. As mentioned earlier, she was by now looking for more demanding and challenging material that would allow her to develop as an actress, and she knew that a character like the suicidal Gloria was a complete departure from her previous work. One of the reasons I took the part is that I want to play something completely different, something that is not necessarily sympathetic in the conventional sense. But beyond an artistic challenge, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was also a project that appealed to her on a personal level, because by the time the script arrived, Jane had already begun a complete transformation of herself. So far in her life, Jane Fonda had never been an overtly political person. Her first real awakening to the world around her came in 1967 while filming Hurry Sundown in Louisiana, where she experienced firsthand the ongoing power of the KKK in the American South. However, the most profound political shift in her life occurred during a time in France, where she witnessed the civil unrest of 1968 and was deeply influenced by Simone Signoret and Yves Montand, who both belonged to the intellectual left in France, and also got in touch with members of the French Communist Party, who began to completely reshape her view on the ongoing war in Vietnam.
Our government was lying to us, and men were dying because of it. And I felt that I had to do anything that I could to expose the lies and help end the war.
Jane later reflected that she was initially a strong defender of the US against any criticism from her husband and her friends in France. I defended us. I could not believe our country was doing anything wrong. I could remember the Second World War from when I was a child, and I could remember letters my father wrote me from the Pacific. In my earliest memory of this country, we were the heroes. So I couldn't believe that what we were doing in Vietnam was wrong. There had to be some misunderstanding.
I remember very well. We were in Saint-Tropez, and it was when Johnson started bombing North Vietnam. And it was in the headlines of the paper. And my husband, Vadim, looked at that and he said, you know, "Crains nom de Dieu, mais ils sont fous." He could not believe that our elected officials were so stupid as to believe what they were being told and to go ahead and permit this to happen. And I thought, well, who the hell does he think he is? Sour grapes, just because you all lost. I didn't say this out loud. But, you know, the French had colonized Vietnam and the Vietnamese had beat them too. So I just thought it was sour grapes. I really didn't know. I didn't know where Vietnam was. But when American soldiers told me what was happening and gave me a book by Jonathan Schell called The Village of Ben Suc, and I literally, small book, I read it, I was a different person. It was like, holy shit.
Jane began closely following coverage of the war in French television, which offered a stark contrast to the narrative she was hearing from the US. She spoke with French activists, American deserters, and members of the Viet Cong who were visiting Paris. Looking back, she explained that her intense opposition to the war stemmed from the fact that she had once believed in it just as strongly. In the beginning, it was very hard for me to believe what they were saying. I remember resisting. I remember thinking that I was brought up to believe that my country goes to war to help people. Eventually, I was forced to face the fact that we were being lied to. I think if I had not been so idealistic about the country, I wouldn't have been so angry when I began to realize. I felt sickened. Part of my identity had been that I was a citizen of a country that represented moral integrity, justice, and a desire for peace.
You know, I've tried to think back over how it happened that little by little I became concerned to the point where I wanted to take a direct political and emotional stand in certain issues. It started, I guess, about 4 years ago. I was living in France, and stories started coming in, as they do, easier in France than they do in America, about what's been going on in Vietnam. And, you know, I found it very difficult to believe. And I said to my French friends, I said, if the American Army and if the Marines and our government are doing these things, they must be okay. I mean, we're Americans, so they must be okay. I really believed that. I thought, well, we're always on the side of the angels. And it was American soldiers who opened my eyes, who had been in Vietnam, that made me realize it. And if you're a real believer and you're shown to have been fooled, lied to, the other side, you become a warrior. Then I started finding out more things. I started seeing film. I started hearing GIs talk. And I began to realize that maybe they weren't okay. And that maybe as Americans we are just as capable of atrocities, of mistakes, as all the other people in the world. We're no better, but we're no worse. And it's important for people to realize that just because the system says something is right, that it's right, maybe it's wrong.
Jane, who had been Miss Army recruiter in 1959, began to develop a new attitude about life and activism that would soon come to define her. As I began to read more, including reports from the International War Crimes Tribunal, I began to wonder, why had I not paid more attention and taken action sooner? It wasn't that I was lazy or lacked curiosity. I think it had to do with giving up comfort. And I don't mean material comfort. I mean the comfort that ignorance provides.
But I mean, how many men died because our presidents were afraid of looking weak? It's disgusting. It's awful.
During this time of political awakening, Jane Fonda also became pregnant, later saying that her child was most of all an attempt to save her marriage, which was slowly falling apart, but she also said that her pregnancy made her desire for peace even greater. I began to feel a unity with people. I began to love people. There was a lot going on in the world, and I was pregnant, which makes a woman like a sponge, very open to what's going on around her. It was around that time that I began to realize that I wanted to change my life and participate in trying to end the war. So Jane's life underwent a rapid and profound transformation, and she felt that They Shoot Horses, Don't They was the perfect project to reflect where she was at that moment, both personally and artistically. It was the first time she was involved in a movie that had something to say, stating, "It's a story about people dealing with the problems created by society rather than by themselves. They are dealing with them the best they can, yet they are condemned for their solutions. The Depression is the closest America ever came before to national disaster, the kind of thing that unites people and reduces everything to basic questions. Eat or not, live or die." Perhaps audiences will be able to come away from seeing They Shoot Horses with the feeling that if we could pull out of the Depression, we could pull out of the mess we're in now. Jane started working on the movie in November 1968, 2 weeks after giving birth to her daughter Vanessa, named after Vanessa Redgrave, whom she had already seen speak at fundraisers and whose activism she highly admired, saying about her, "Here was a woman who controlled her destiny," something Jane was determined to do herself from now on as well. Shooting of the Sterile Cuckoo started in September 1968, following 3 weeks of rehearsals and improvisations, which Liza used to completely immerse herself into the role, remembering, "Alan got me together with 4 college girls who were going to play the girls in Pookie's Storm. He wanted us to get to know each other just as ourselves. So each girl started talking about her background. The first girl said, 'Well, my mother collects antiques, my father's a minister,' and so on. So I thought, what am I gonna say? That I come from a showbiz family? And at that moment, Pookie moved in. And when I had to talk, I told her background, just automatically. Alan said, 'Good, that's it.'"
So what I will do is I'll start them out by improvising relationships between them, improvising things you'll never see on screen. So they become the characters. They have to concentrate. They have to relate to each other. And then after they've gotten that, and they've gotten that kind of reality, and they feel they belong together, then we'll go to the lines, and then I'll shoot the lines.
Liza and Alan Pakula, both venturing into uncharted territory as director and a leading movie actress, built a very close connection during the shooting, spending hours talking about the emotional background of her character. When I worked with Liza, I would do what I found worked for her. Halfway through the film, we were in a very difficult scene, and she was having trouble with it. She suddenly said to me, "Alan, if you could just tell me the story of the picture." I knew that Liza knew the screenplay backward, but I said, "Alright." I took her to my trailer and told it as you talk to a 9-year-old child, in the most simplistic terms. Once upon a time, there was a little girl. For whatever reason, that helped her at that moment, and occasionally I'd do that with her. Liza later said that at some point, she and Pakula only needed to look at each other to know what they meant. On the first day of shooting, Pakula initially wanted to work on an outside scene, but heavy rain changed all plans and forced the entire crew inside, where he decided to film the most demanding scene of the entire movie instead, Pookie's desperate phone call to Jerry. For Liza, this was a very demanding and tense moment, requiring her to dive headfirst into the emotional complexity of her character. We had yacked it out in rehearsals, but I didn't know how to work it. I was scared to death, but right before I stepped in front of the camera, it hit me like a rock, and I just did it. Pakula remembered that he shot the scene 3 times, always in one single take. The first take was actually good enough to use. It was stunning. She broke down, but I wanted her to fight it. On the second take, she was exhausted, dry. After she went off alone for a few minutes, she did the third take perfectly. I figured if she could get that scene, it would give her confidence.
You're a nat. You work from instinct, don't you, as a natural actress? Just
Yes,
reacting to...
I think I've worked with enough really good directors and other really well-trained and wonderful actors to pick up certain techniques that help me out instead of just having to, bluff my way along on my instincts. I've got some pretty good training.
While the role was highly demanding for Liza, the The shooting of the Sterile Cuckoo was still very pleasant for her, enjoying her time with both Alan Pakula and co-star Wendell Burton, who both admired her dedication and cooperativeness. Pakula later saying, "I never saw anybody get more joy out of working, and it became contagious. Liza was always on time and always prepared. A director's dream." Liza herself later summarized her experience on the movie with, "The most important thing about Cuckoo is that I did Pookie right. I thought I could make people comprehend this marvelous, funny, tortured girl, and I did. And her story is told properly. To me, that's the success." It quickly became clear during the early days of filming They Shoot Horses, Don't They, that James Poe was not the right man to direct the project. He had trouble handling the large cast and guiding the single performers into their parts, and he also tried to give the movie a too stylized, self-conscious atmosphere. Eventually, the problems became too obvious, and Poe was dismissed from the project. A decision fully supported by Jane Fonda, despite having been cast in the film thanks to Poe's involvement. But she too had recognized that he was not right for the picture and was much happier with the director who was hired to replace him, Sydney Pollack. The change was significant for her not only because Pollack was better suited to the material, but also because, for the first time in her career, a director encouraged her to take an active role in shaping and defining her character. Sydney had no idea what this meant to me. This was a director who was actually seeking my input. I began to study the book in ways I hadn't before. This was the first time in my life as an actor that I was working on a film about larger societal issues, and instead of my professional work feeling peripheral to life, it felt relevant. Jane and Sydney Pollack also got along so well because he agreed with her on the picture's larger meaning and its message for audiences of 1969, saying, "Kids don't want to be entertained today, they're pretty cynical. Hopefully they will find it interesting and enlightening to discover that there's been another bad time in America, even worse than it is now."
The roughness and the anger and resentment that was prevalent in the 30s was a metaphor for a lot of what everybody felt in the 60s. The anger at the betrayal of the country and the government and so on.
Inspired by her understanding with Sydney Pollack, Jane completely dedicated herself to the part of Gloria. She moved from France to a beach house in Malibu together with her husband and their newborn child, but eventually spent many nights in her trailer on the set in order to maintain the dark intensity and hopelessness of her character. I played a suicidal, manic-depressive woman, and it was hard for me to go home at night, happy as I was at being a mother, and not lose the character. I became Gloria. She was uneducated, tough, bitter, cynical. It took me a long time to stop talking like her and feeling like her. I discovered a black side to my character I didn't know about. If Henry Fonda acted to escape his personal troubles, Jane channeled all her pain, anxiety, and the growing strain of her crumbling marriage into her performance, hardly socializing with the other cast members during the 2.5 months long shooting. And Jane also committed herself physically to the role, taking up swimming and running to lose weight, and built the strengths needed for the film's exhausting demands. She later described the race scenes, filmed in real time and used by Sydney Pollack to decide which extras would be released from the movie, as the toughest thing I've had to do ever. Sydney Pollack was just as complimentary of Jane's work as Alan Pakula was of Liza Minnelli, saying, "There was no vanity in the performance, no self-preservation. She was completely involved and totally professional. She went all the way." Jane later summarized her work on the movie as, "The film was a turning point for me, both professionally and personally. I probed deeper into the character and into myself than I had before and gained confidence as an actor." So both Liza and Jane pretty much felt physically exhausted and emotionally drained after shooting their roles, determined to do justice to their movies, but also prove the depths of their talents for characters not immediately associated with their public images. Not singing or dancing, not sexy or funny. And critics loudly applauded both of them. Reviews for The Sterile Cuckoo were not overly enthusiastic, some calling it the best movie of the last couple of years about first love, others stating that it looked and felt like a 1950s television drama with nothing to say. However, everyone agreed that Liza Minnelli's performance existed in a league of its own, so superior to the movie around her that they could be judged completely separately. Pauline Kael called her just about perfect. The LA Times described her performance as warm, touching and beguiling, and many critics immediately talked about a possible Oscar for Liza. Rex Reed saying, "It's the kind of performance that breaks hearts and wins Oscars," the National Observer stating, "You may mark your Oscar ballots right now," and the Motion Picture Herald adding, "The screen has a big and important new star in Liza Minnelli. She gives a dramatic performance of the sort that wins Academy Awards." Because Liza had been mainly known as an entertainer so far, her performance in The Sterile Cuckoo came for many as a revelation, something unexpected and surprising, and something that once and for all separated her from the domineering shadow of her mother. By focusing on singing and dancing earlier in her career, Liza had chosen a medium that showcased her natural talents and helped her build a strong resume, but it also kept the inevitable comparisons to Judy Garland alive. Her sudden arrival as a versatile dramatic actress now completely distinguished her as an artist with potential that apparently not even her mother had possessed. Of course, Judy had certainly done dramatic work in her career as well, and quite wonderfully, but in the public eye, she was so strongly associated with parts in musicals and comedies that Liza's serious characterization now established her for many as the stronger actress between them. Several articles proclaiming that another star is born. However, Liza would never learn how her mother would have felt about this acclaim for her daughter, because Judy Garland passed away on June 22, 1969, before the movie's release. If Liza Minnelli's performance in The Sterile Cuckoo had such a powerful impact because it defied expectations set by her career as a singer and dancer, the same was true for Jane Fonda in They Shoot Horses Don't They, who until then had never portrayed a character so raw, bleak and uncompromising. She was initially very anxious about how audiences would respond to her change of image, remarking at the time, "I look so scruffy in the part that I'll probably never get another one." But the acclaim for her work spoke for itself. With Gloria, Jane had found the perfect vehicle for her specific talents, for her ability to be no-nonsense, unforgiving, sarcastic, and lost all at the same time. Like with Liza, almost all reviews immediately predicted an Oscar nomination for Jane's performance, which was described as excellent and heroic. Variety stating that Jane gave a dramatic performance that turns her own previous career as a sex bomb upside down and gives the film a personal focus and emotionally gripping power. One of Jane's biggest supporters was probably Pauline Kael, who called Gloria the strongest role an American actress has had on screen this year, and wrote, "Fonda goes all the way, as actresses rarely do once they become stars, giving in totally to this isolated, morbid girl who can't trust anybody. Jane Fonda makes one understand self-destructive courage." Like Liza Minnelli, Jane had forever stepped out of the shadow of her famous parent by doing something that felt completely her own, and portraying an acting style and character that was as far removed from her father's on-screen approach and personality as possible, perfectly suited to her, while also the clear result of talent and dedication, which was rewarded with a Best Actress prize from the New York Film Critics. It's the biggest accolade I've ever been given. One tries to be blasé about things, but now that it's happened, it's very nice. So both Liza and Jane had turned their own images so far upside down, and added enormous depths and complexities to their careers, stunning critics and audiences with their unexpected portrayals of loneliness, desperation and regret. For both of them, it was the right time in their careers for these kinds of transformations, both because of their own developments as artists, but also because the film industry had changed by now in a way that made it possible to receive them. In part also due to the work of Jane's brother Peter. The days of old Hollywood were gone by now. New and unconventional performers like Jack Nicholson or Dustin Hoffman replaced the movie stars from yesteryear. And actresses like Jane Fonda and Liza Minnelli could position themselves as leading players for the future. Jane had the traditional beauty, that allowed her a career during the last days of the studio system, but 1969 had shown that her actual strength was in the kind of gritty realism that would define movies moving forward. And an unusual screen presence like Liza Minnelli would most likely have had a very difficult time to achieve success on the screen in an earlier era, often described as not traditionally beautiful or appealing. But the intensity and authenticity of her performance now marked her as a true original, committed, compelling, and perfectly in tune with a new generation of cinema that was moving away from the polished glamour of classic Hollywood.
How would you describe your face?
Unusual.
Yeah.
You know, and that it is. But that's what God gave me, and other people seem to like it, so some people at least.
Yeah.
So I guess now it's time to give my own thoughts about these two performances that were so important to the careers of Jane Fonda and Liza Minnelli. And let me start right away by saying that I certainly share the overwhelming praise that they both received in 1969. Their performances are dedicated, exhausting, honest and haunting, both leaving unforgettable but also strikingly different impressions. The stunning effect of Jane Fonda's performance is how immediately she draws the audience into her character the moment she appears. They Shoot Horses is certainly an ensemble picture, and there are many fantastic performances to be found, but Jane effortlessly becomes the most significant reference point in the story. She does not serve as a narrator, nor does her development feel more relevant than anyone else's, but her mix of aggressiveness and uncertainty defines the film's bleak, hopeless and beaten tone.
What's the use of having a kid unless you got enough dough to take care of it?
I could never get... Jimmy wants the baby.
Yeah. Why not drop another sucker into this mess?
Liza Minnelli's Pookie also immediately sets the tone of her picture, displaying all her most dominant characteristics right away, but her introduction feels rather overwhelming at first. Arriving like a storm, eccentric, loud and emotionally erratic, Liza makes Pookie a whirlwind of contradictions and sudden shifts, constantly changing topics mid-sentence, dominating every conversation, and exuding an almost manic intensity in her pursuit of a man she just met for the first time. Because of this, it does take a bit before the viewer can begin to see that what feels alienating and confusing at first is actually a heartbreaking portrait of a young woman living on the edge of psychological collapse.
Pookie, that's terrible.
Now, what do you mean? Come on, I'll take one of you afterwards. You can see what we look like as corpses. God take Arabella, God take Pookie, God take Jerry.
Looking at the performances by both Jane and Liza, neither of their characters possesses a transformative or significant arc, as they both will keep their domineering distinction right until the end, both desperate and lost in their own way, neither able to escape the attacks of the world around them, but also strikingly different. Jane's work is defined by restraint. She delivers one-liners and bitter sarcasm with cutting precision, but always laced with quiet desperation. Even when Gloria lashes out, Jane Fonda keeps her grounded. Lee Strasberg and James Poe were certainly right when they highlighted the quality of her eyes, which can project a mute but ever-present panic, an unwillingness to conform, hinting at a deeper struggle against roles imposed on her.
The hell do you want? Anyone ever tell you?
Yeah, they told me.
And despite her dominance to the story, Jane also never overshadows the ensemble around her, integrating herself seamlessly into the group, giving all other characters the chance to tell their own stories and add to the movie's overall message. In Gloria's storyline, the most relevant aspect is clearly her relationship to her dance partner Robert, Michael Saracen bringing a kindness and tentative charm to his role that contrasts effectively with Jane's uncompromising rejection. As the movie goes on, it would have been easy for Jane to slowly soften Gloria to Robert's more positive worldview, but she never gives in to such a pass, making it clear that Gloria has seen and experienced too much in her life.
What do you say to that, Robert?
I don't know, I guess so.
He says no.
Does she do all the talking for you, Robert?
That's right.
In contrast to Jane's interior characterization, Liza's approach rests on the exposure of all of Pookie's emotions and feelings. Love, anxiety, excitement and fear are all turned up to full volume. But even with such an expressive role, Liza avoids turning Pookie into a one-dimensional plot device that only exists for the personal growth of Wendell Burton's Jerry. There's a strange dignity in Pookie's chaos, in her belief that life should be intense, romantic, and full of connection. Liza finds that thread and follows it with haunting conviction, resisting to make Pookie either a tragic figure or a mere nuisance, but instead both. Her emotional volatility is exhausting, yet it's clear she doesn't know how else to survive in a world that has never made space for someone like her.
90% of Nancy Putnam's body is by DuPont. Fiberglass boobs, fiberglass brain, fiberglass smog.
Just get out.
There are few actresses that could match the emotional transparency of Liza Minnelli. Even so early in her acting career, she is completely controlled by her feelings, dialing every experience of a character up to the maximum. And while this can be distracting occasionally, it helps Pookie to believably come alive with the needed respect and understanding for such grand emotions. Her famous phone scene pushes the audience to its limit, her desperation feeling more uncomfortable every second, while never alienating Pookie, whose pain remains achingly human and heartbreakingly real.
I've really been making a terrific effort to be friends with some of the weirdos around here. I even apologized to Helen Upshaw.
Listen to me.
And I told Lillian Lerner that I didn't know that she wore dentures, that it was just an accident and a coincidence. I don't even remember saying it about Bill and Helen. Just give me another chance, okay?
Jane Fonda not only finds a striking inner life for Gloria, but also makes her physical transformation distressingly realistic. The film's relentless dance marathon demands a lot from its cast, and Jane conveys the slow, aching deterioration of mind and body with unwavering precision, showing Gloria's growing lack of concentration, her numbness, the mechanical movements, but also the hysteria during the race sequences, the unwillingness to give up, the overpowering pressure to endure under all circumstances. In this way, Jane also makes the ending of They Shoot Horses, Don't They entirely believable, never letting Gloria become a symbol for the movie's message, but showing her as a woman who has truly reached the end. Gloria's soul has been scraped bare by life, and Jane respects and understands this bleakness, portraying it with almost invisible choices throughout the film until the audience realizes that there is no hope for a character like her.
I'm going to get off its merry-go-round. I'm so sick of the whole stinking thing.
What thing?
Life.
They Shoot Horses is undoubtedly a superior movie to the Sterile Cuckoo that does offer Jane a more thought-out and layered approach. Liza Minnelli, despite all her dedicated investment into the role of Pookie, occasionally does feel held back by the script that never takes advantage of her open and transparent characterization, instead leaving many questions unanswered and thereby contradicting the intensity of her work. Why is Pookie so focused on Jerry? Why does it feel as if her whole existence hangs on his attention? Essentially, who actually is Pookie? Neither the movie nor Liza ever give answers to these issues, but it is solely due to her work that Pookie is still the perfect embodiment for the story's arc. Unlike Jane's Gloria, Pookie is not grounded in social realism, but rather floats through the film like a lonely spectre. While Jane gives Gloria an always lingering past, it feels impossible to imagine Pookie outside of the structure of the Sterile Cuckoo or even be able to manage the burdens of a daily life, but this is not what Liza is asked to do. Her character instead exists firmly in the world created for her, and within this world, Liza's choices always make sense and elevate her material, making it understandable why her humor and manic energy would initially intrigue Jerry at the beginning, but soon exhaust and repel him.
You're gonna send me back home, aren't you? You're gonna send me back to that mailman, aren't you?
So while Jane's performance is hardened, exhausted, and mostly internal, Liza embodied emotional chaos and intensity. But what could easily have become a caricature is always grounded by Liza's deep respect for the character, knowing when to let go and when to hold back, possessing an innate understanding of movie acting, especially for a relative newcomer at the time. Jane used all her personal and professional experience to create one of cinema's most memorable anti-heroines, whose hope died long ago, yet who can't help but keep pushing against the walls closing in, giving a character study that is brutal, unsentimental, and unforgettable. Together, they gave performances that were shaped by their time, but also ahead of it, unsettling and haunting, and lingering long after the credits roll. Given the outstanding reviews for their work, it is no surprise that both Liza Minnelli and Jane Fonda did end up among the 5 Best Actress contenders at the 1969 Academy Awards. For each of them, it marked a career-defining moment and the highest point they had reached to date. However, neither of them was particularly focused on awards or movie stardom at this stage of their lives.
How concerned are you about the fact that you may get an Oscar?
It would be very nice.
Yeah. Do you dream about it? Does it mean a lot?
No, I've got lots of other more important things to dream about.
Life magazine wrote in 1969, "Despite 5 husbands, despite fans who screamed, 'We love you' and 'Never leave us', despite being the most worshipped entertainer of her era, there was no one to handle the funeral arrangements for Judy Garland. So Liza did it."
Somebody said to me, "I have terrible news." And I said, "What? My dad died." And they said, "No." I said, "No." They said, "Your mom died." I said, "No, that's not possible." Because to me, she was forever.
To keep her mind off her mother's death, Liza took charge of nearly every detail of the funeral. From choosing a white coffin and selecting the flowers, to creating a celebratory atmosphere where no one was expected to wear black, and opening the ceremony to fans to pay their respects.
Judy Garland's daughter, Liza Minnelli, had requested that her mother's funeral be held in as dignified a manner as possible. Apparently, she's getting her wish. Some of the thousands of people who came today have been standing online for hours, but they were quiet, orderly, respectful.
Liza later said about her mother, "It was her love of life that carried her through everything. The middle of the road was never for her. She wanted the pinnacle of excitement. If she was happy, she wasn't just happy, she was ecstatic. And when she was sad, she was sadder than anybody. She was a great star and a great talent, and for the rest of my life, I will be proud to be Judy Garland's daughter."
I'm very proud of my mom, and being people, it sounds so ominous when somebody says, "People used to call you Judy Garland's daughter." It sounds like the son of Dracula. What are they talking about? My mother was a genius. The only thing that ever gets me upset or annoyed or even uptight is when I'm put in the position of defending her, because I feel she needs no defense.
To further distract herself, Liza also immediately threw herself back into work and appeared in her next movie role in Otto Preminger's Tell Me That You Love Me, Junie Moon, where she played a young woman whose face is scarred in an acid attack. The project was, however, not as joyful for Liza as the Sterile Cuckoo, disliking Preminger's directing style and ultimately rejecting his offer for a 7-year contract, preferring to keep her freedom as a performer. During the filming, Liza found herself at the center of controversy when a woman sued Otto Preminger, alleging that Liza danced nude on her husband's grave in this scene. This incident prompted Massachusetts to pass the so-called Liza Minnelli bill, which criminalizes filming nude scenes in cemeteries without prior permission. Liza herself, however, always later denied that she was actually nude during the scene. But this remained not the only scandal around her this time, because she also made international headlines when newspapers reported about a possible affair between Liza and the Australian Prime Minister, whom she had met after a show in 1968. I get a phone call in the middle of the night, and newspapers are printing stories that I had an affair with the Prime Minister.
They keep trying to make me interesting. I don't have to be, a slut to be interesting. If somebody just talk to me and listen to me, I'm interesting enough, I think. Let me go out and do my work. Let me do what I do. Why make up things about me?
Jane Fonda was also increasingly in the spotlight for reasons unrelated to acting, as her growing political convictions now took over her life, which also meant that she would not go back to France. I didn't like criticizing America while I was in another country. If I was going to oppose the war, it would be in the streets of America with my fellow countrymen.
I used to live in France. I lived in France for 7 years, and when I found out what was going on in Vietnam, I came back here because I thought that this is the place where Americans have to be if they really care about what is happening, if they really want to change things. And I believe that the people who are speaking out against the war, be they Republicans or Democrats, are patriots.
And at 68 was where all those seeds that had been buried began to bear fruit, and I began to look at the world and came home. You know, they always say, you're a communist, go home, go back to Hanoi. I came home. You know, it's you go home if you want to fight for your country and try to, you know, make things better.
One of Jane's first steps to distance herself from her old life was cutting off her hair after shooting on They Shoot Horses completed, resulting in what would soon be known as her Clute look. At the time, however, she had little interest in pursuing further acting roles, choosing instead to fully immerse herself in her newfound political and social commitments. She visited Alcatraz in late 1969 during its occupation by Native American activists, defying a Coast Guard blockade by sailing to the island with supplies. The experience would become one of the most pivotal moments in her political awakening. I learned about the genocide that had taken place and is still taking place. The atrocities committed against Native Americans in the name of efficiency, in the interest of white farmers. She followed this activity with a public protest at the military base Fort Lawton in Washington State in March 1970, where she was arrested for the first time.
While I was up there, I found out that the Indians were planning to occupy an army base in protest against the fact that their demands for the right to the land, all non-used federal land, goes to the Indians by treaty. And when they have tried to ask the officials to let them use the land to build a cultural center and a university, nobody's been listening to them. So they thought, well, people will listen to us maybe if we occupy the base. And I thought, well, if I'm there, perhaps by virtue of my presence, there will be less brutality. Well, that was the thing that happened in the morning. In the afternoon, I went on to another army base with a group of GIs to talk to the soldiers, just to find out, you know, what they thought, the ones that had been in Vietnam, the ones that were going over, and to invite them to the coffee house that night. And I was arrested and taken to a provost marshal's office and detained there for over 3 hours and given expulsion papers saying that I had broken a law. And when I asked the colonel what law I had broken, he said, I don't know. However, I was given my paper and I left.
Jane then garnered more controversy when she met with the leadership of the Black Panthers, but she never condoned violence and was involved with the organization only for a brief amount of time. She was mainly active in the anti-war movement, participating in meetings and discussions with draft resistors and activists.
I don't think that my career as an actor is as important in the world as my work as an activist. And I just, like most of us, I would like to feel that somehow in my life I've helped to make things better on different levels, you know.
But while Jane remains proud of her work as an activist, she also understands why she created so much controversy in the early 70s. Today, she looks back and says that she threw herself into her campaigns too quickly and without the needed experience and intellectual background. Her transition happened almost overnight, and she accepted many radical views without fully understanding them, trying to explain them in public appearances, press conferences or interviews, but came across as too aggressive and insincere, often remaining vague about her goals and intentions.
My biggest mistake was trying to create legitimacy, rapid legitimacy within a movement that was in a way beyond my comprehension. It had gone from idealism to a sectarianism and a stridency that I didn't understand, but I didn't want to be thought of as some starlet. I wanted to be taken seriously, and so I used words and rhetoric that, I mean, it sounds strange to my ears now. It must have been really preposterous coming out of my mouth at the time.
Jane later said, "I was not ready for so much antagonistic public exposure. I made it easy for the media and others to choose a dubious, if not downright hostile lens through which to view me. There I was, up on my soapbox, pronouncing myself a revolutionary woman, while Barbarella had just played in a theater around the corner. What I wanted to be was better, and to make it better. I didn't think enough about how I was being perceived. I was too immersed in what I was learning. I wanted to be taken seriously and mistakenly thought that the more militant I appeared, the more seriously I'd be taken.
In the early years of activism, they would have me on the cover of magazines, and it would be Jane Fonda, nag, nag, nag. They did not like women with a voice. You know, I became a lightning rod, and I understand that why that happened. You have to get mad at somebody, and they can't get mad at the government. So I'm the one.
Just a week before the Oscars, Liza made headlines again when she was involved in a serious motorcycle accident on Sunset Boulevard. The crash left her unconscious for over an hour and resulted in a fractured shoulder, a broken front tooth, kidney damage, and 29 stitches to her face. However, she left the hospital after only 5 days and attended the Oscar ceremony, her arm in a sling. Jane Fonda attended the show as well, raising her fist to the fans in the bleachers. Liza later remembered that the doctor had given me a shot. He said it was a minor painkiller and I was in a daze. So I just hung on to Daddy. I didn't even know when it was the Best Actress category. I applauded and Daddy said that was it. I just sat there, not knowing what was going on. Of course, both Liza and Jane ultimately lost the Oscar to Maggie Smith for the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. The context of Maggie's win, along with the chances of Liza and Jane and the overall awards race, is explored in detail in the Maggie Smith video of this series.
So what comes to your mind when I say Maggie Smith?
Love is the first thing that came to my mind. Love her. She beat me for an Oscar once, though. I still love her.
After the Oscars, both Jane and Liza once again captured public attention as their marriages unraveled. Liza announced her separation from husband Peter Allen, whom she had married in 1967, the very day after the ceremony, while Jane came to terms with the dissolution of her relationship with Roger Vadim. So for both Jane and Liza, 1969 and 1970 had been years that changed their lives and their careers forever. Years that saw them coming fully into their own as screen performers and their own personalities, independent from their famous backgrounds. I don't want to deny that both of them very often benefited from this background. An audition arranged by Judy Garland, a screen test for an old friend of your father, a house right next to Lee Strasberg, a name that gets you a job because it's sure to attract attention. Both of them clearly had important advantages on their side, but we cannot forget that both of them also fought their way to the top on their own terms. And ultimately, both of them could only stay at the top for so long because their talents enabled them to do so. After all, the children of performers like Bing Crosby, John Barrymore, Robert Mitchum or Edward G. Robinson had all tried to duplicate their parents' acclaim without any success. Without having it, even the greatest connections cannot get you ahead. It's a feeling that both Liza and Jane shared, Liza saying, "The head start you get isn't that much of a head start. In this day and age, producers don't put money into something that isn't going to make it." And Jane echoed this view, later stating, "I was proud of my name and it could get me into producers' offices. But no one gets a part on the strengths of that, because too much money is involved. Mistakes are too expensive."
You can get your foot in the door when you have famous parents, right? But the door doesn't open and stay open unless you're talented.
And the talents of both Jane and Liza proved themselves even more undeniable just a short time later. Following They Shoot Horses, Don't They, Jane had initially decided to step away from acting to fully commit to her anti-war activism, but she became intrigued again when Alan Pakula, who had just made The Sterile Cuckoo and wanted to continue his work as a director, sent her a script for a film called Clued. Meanwhile, Liza, now firmly established as a serious screen actress, renewed her pursuit of a role that had previously eluded her. After all, even Christopher Isherwood, the author of Goodbye to Berlin, the novel that was the basis for the musical Cabaret, reportedly remarked upon seeing The Sterile Cuckoo, "That girl is a lot like Sally." But those are stories for another time.